Twitter Files 10.5, not an official drop, but some very good updates that came out. Matt Taibbi is telling us, hang tight. I know you guys are waiting for the next installment of this stuff, but it is coming soon. And when it does, it is going to connect the dots. We've got two updates from Taibbi. He posted this on Twitter. He tells us the FBI is explaining to Twitter that they'll handle info from the USIC, the United States Intelligence Community, while the Department of Homeland Security Agency, CISA, will send domestic reports. More coming soon from the Twitter Files. He posted that 12/29/2022, and we know that the next drops that come out are supposed to be COVID-related, misinformation-related, and so on. This is an email from Yoel. This one was published sent September 21st, 2020 at 8:48 p.m. From Elvis Chan, the supervisory special agent out of San Francisco, who was the FBI agent responsible for colluding with the big tech companies. He sent this over to Yoel Roth. He says, "Hey, Yoel, thanks for the response. I have some additional questions regarding them. I am aware the industry is meeting about this on Friday, so you may not have any clarification until then. We can discuss during and after our scheduled meeting, depending on what your schedule looks like. 1. Question. If it will only be a one-way communication from the U.S. government to the industry, it seems like it should at least be FBI and CISA. From the U.S. government to the industry, at least FBI and CISA. We can give you everything we're seeing from the FBI and U.S. intelligence community agencies. CISA will know what is going on in each state, via the Homeland Security Information Network. New agencies enter the game, and we also have new domestic surveillance, watching what's happening in the states through CISA and the FBI, monitoring speech in America." Now, that's just one update from Matt Taibbi. He gave us more on his Substack, and so let's check in and get some more details. Matt Taibbi writes, notes from San Francisco. On the way home after the holidays, some notes on the Twitter Files. Matt writes, having seen the Redwoods with the boys by day, sampled dim sum last evening, and overdosed on movies in San Francisco, I'm headed home. Terrific trip I won't forget. In the coming days, you'll find a new thread on Twitter, along with a two-part article here at his Substack, which you should subscribe to at taibbi.substack.com, explaining the latest Twitter Files findings. Even as someone in the middle of it, naturally jazzed by everything I'm reading, I feel the necessity of explaining why it's so important to keep hammering at this. Matt writes, any lawyer who's ever sifted through a large discovery file will report the task is like archaeology. You dig a little, you find a little claw, you move on, you find a tooth, hours later you get a pelvis bone, and so on. And after a while, you think you're looking at something that was alive once, but what? Who knows? Matt says, at the moment, all we can do is show a few pieces of what we think might be a larger story. I believe the broader picture will eventually describe a company that was directly or indirectly blamed for allowing Trump to get elected, and whose subjugation and takeover by furious combinations of politicians, enforcement officials, and media became priority as soon as Trump took office. Trump used Twitter to win. Everybody was following him. Every tweet had the whole world captivated. So as soon as he won, they had to take that tool away. The next few pieces that come are the result of looking at two discrete data sets, one ranging from the mid-2017 to early 2018s, and the other spanning from roughly March 2020 through the present. In the first piece, focused on the late 2017 period, you see how Washington politicians learned that Twitter could be trained quickly to cooperate and cede control over its mod process through a combination of threatened legislation and bad press. They just sent Elvis Chan in there to have powwows with Yoel. In the second, you'll also see how a cycle of threats and bad media first emerged in 2017 and became institutionalized, to the point where a long list of government enforcement agencies essentially got to operate Twitter as an involuntary contractor, a state agent, an extension of the government, heading into the 2020 election. Requests for moderation were funneled mainly through the FBI, the self-described belly button of the federal government. Not a joke. An agent really does call it that. FBI, they probably pierced it too. The company leadership knew as far back as 2017 that giving in to even one request to suspend this or that set of accused hostile foreign accounts would lead to an endless cycle of demands. Right? It's just like warming up an asset, just like you see in the movies. We'll work to contain that, offered one comms official, without much enthusiasm. After the company caved for the first time, Twitter was living the hell that its leaders created. Matt says, what does all this mean? I haven't really had time to think it over. Surely, though, it means something. He says, I've been amused by the accusations that these stories are cherry-picked, as opposed to what? The perfectly representative sample of the human experience you normally read in the news? Idiots. I added that part. Matt didn't say that. I did. Former baseball analytics whiz Nate Silver chimed in. Some people call him Nate Copper. Nate says, people don't distinguish enough between a random cross-section of communications from a person or organization X and cherry-pick set of favorable examples from a comprehensive list of X. And he's, geeking out over himself. He says, what does he mean by favorable examples? Take a quote like this from FBI agent Elvis Chan telling Yoel Roth at Twitter about possible violative activity. Reports from the intelligence community will come via the Bureau, while a DHS agency will handle the home front. Department of Homeland Security is going to be monitoring U.S. individuals. Matt says, who wouldn't cherry pick that story? Is the implication that another email exists somewhere telling Roth that he won't be getting requests from the U.S. intelligence community by way of the FBI? Come on. Is there a competing story? Is there more evidence that the FBI says, hey, Yoel, thanks for everything, but we're done manipulating you and commandeering your entire company? Did they stop that? Matt would report that, I'm sure, but it hasn't happened. So Matt says, let's stop seeing if they can lie for a while. How bad can it be? Signing out. Thank you for checking him out, right? So that's Matt Taibbi. They're doing great work. So if you want to follow along and get it firsthand, check out Matt Taibbi's Substack. Now, that's more coming, right? Domestic surveillance, all from CISA, monitoring the different states and Homeland Security. And Kanekoa, another independent analyst, an individual also over at Substack at kanekoa.substack.com, he put out a heck of a Twitter thread. Here's what he says. Elon Musk slams CISA censorship as a propaganda platform. CISA, created by Department of Homeland Security, a consortium that used 120 analysts to censor millions of social media posts on COVID and the elections. He writes, the Department of Homeland Security outsourced censorship to an organization called the EIP, something we've talked about here, comprising 4 organizations, one called the Stanford Internet Observatory, University of Washington, and Atlantic's Council, along with Graphica. Here's an image. Figure 1.3 shows the major stakeholder groups that collaborated with the election group to censor America. We've got Elections Infrastructure, ISAC, CISA, Cyber and Infrastructure, and the GEC at the top. They have the big heavy hand. They put pressure on everybody else below them. All of what they call civil society, all of the different causes, Stanford, Harvard, AARP, NAACP, all the platforms are compliant. Facebook, Twitter, Google, TikTok, Reddit, Nextdoor, Discord, Pinterest. And they say, we did not formalize partnerships with the media, but we definitely engaged with them. Okay, all of these other things were formal relationships. 120 analysts monitored 15 tech platforms in 2020. 22 million tweets were labeled misinformation. The entire misinformation narrative was targeted for widespread platform throttling. The entire platform was throttling the information. Look at all these different tweets. Retweets and incidents. Millions and millions of tweets. Think about these almost like campaign commercials, right? If these people are all on the right and they're all promoting one candidate and one cause and one communication, one narrative, and they get censored, that's like they just took away their campaign commercials, right? They're literally taking away their tools that they can use to win the election. They had a big problem after Trump did this. All of this was useful in 2016, right? Think about all those impressions, all of those retweets, it's like billboards. Every retweet, every tweet is like a billboard, a digital billboard out there. They just chop them all down. And it's all from the people you'd expect. James Woods, Gateway Pundit, Trump Jr., Tom Fitton, Jack Posobiec, Cat Turd, Eric Trump, Callisto, Kirk, Mark Levin, James O'Keefe, Robbie Starbuck, Sean Hannity, right? All of these people. They're installing billboards, digital billboards to support Trump, and the Democratic big tech platforms are just chopping them down. This speech control network flagged popular YouTube channels as well. They were getting YouTube? Project Veritas, Trump, One America News Network, the GOP War Room, Steven Crowder, Judicial Watch. Tweets and videos all getting nuked. Look at these millions and millions of views. Project Veritas, 9.6 mil. Donald Trump, 10.8 mil. Crowder's down here, 8.1 mil. News Now from Fox, 9.4 mil. Billboards all just nuked. The FFO Freedom Report details the government's role in outsourcing this censorship. They say that this was an extensive relationship, $40 million donated. The DHS quietly corrupted CISA's mission. It was designed to protect infrastructure, but they took it over and they used it to censor American speech and to get outcomes of certain elections that they want.
What the Russians have done is weaponized social media.
The issue is not just the Russians, but frankly, domestic disinformation.
Yeah,
how do you think that they've weaponized social media?
Literally using it to manipulate public opinion, to put stories out that are biased or phony in order to drive public opinion a certain way.
Literally what the FBI, CISA, DHS are doing. Literally.
Probably more domestic generation of disinformation content is occurring than foreign. Frankly, I think in 2016, it wasn't that clear that the Russian efforts, in terms of the actual persuasiveness of the content, was all that sophisticated.
It was useless.
I think what the Russians may well have learned is they don't have to make the content up. We have people in the U.S. who will do it.
There's really two totally different disinformation attacks in 2016. The Internet Research Agency created these personas to take over existing groups in the United States. And then once they had established that, they would then try to push the most radical possible position.
Take advantage of them so they could prosecute them with kidnapping plots and insurrections.
We talk way too much about foreign influence. I'm going to be honest. I think we talk way too much about it because it's sexy and it's fun and it's a little bit Cold War-y. But the truth is that the vast majority of these problems, of kind of the problems in our information environment, are domestic problems. They're problems in how we interact with each other, of the norms that have been created about online political speech, about amplification issues, about how now politicians are utilizing platforms. And so I think we have like an 80-20 breakdown of 80% we talk about foreign and 20 domestic. I think that needs to be flipped.
The Kremlin's influence
foreign
operation.
and domestic should be flipped. So 80% foreign, 20% domestic. It should be 20% foreign, 80% domestic because of all of the insurrectionists.
This has a particular resonance for me because in June of 2016, I broke the story of the Russian hack of the Democratic National Committee.
Wow.
Even though I'm sort of a national security reporter and a little more focused on the foreign side, I think the most significant immediate threat to the 2020 election is the domestic threat, domestic disinformation, domestic influence, whatever you want to call it.
We are lost. It's just because of this little bitty pinprick that was put in by a foreign country. It's overwhelmingly more domestic than foreign. This time around in 2020, they must wonder what they could possibly say that would change anyone's mind that's not already being said in the American landscape.
Yeah, so they want to get control over the conversation so they can censor the bad information that doesn't support their cause. Kanekoa continues, and you can follow him on Twitter as well at Kanekoa the Great. Says that CISA had a First Amendment problem. They couldn't go in there and just censor everybody. The U.S. government cannot sandblast millions of voters off the internet. This is the state agent theory. The government, Congress shall make no law, in the First Amendment. And they want to outsource all of this to a private entity who can do all of those things for them. Kanekoa shares another link from that Stanford professor where he's talking about doing just that. He says that CISA lacked the funding and the legal authorizations to do grand-scale censorship, so CISA partnered with the EIP. They filled in the gaps, and they connected the dots. Let's listen to how they did this.
There was a lack of capability around election disinformation. This is not because CISA didn't care about disinformation, but at the time they lacked both kind of the funding and the legal authorizations to go do the kinds of work that would be necessary to truly understand how election disinformation was operating. So because of the feedback and the ideas from this group, we were able to pull together pretty quickly a project between these 4 different institutions to try to fill the gap of the things that the government could not do themselves.
Right. So the government doesn't have the power to do it, but these tech companies can be persuaded using the strong arm of the government to do that work, even though it is a violation of the Constitution. You see here this workflow. They've got the 4 major stakeholders, the government, civil society, platforms, and the media, the same entities we talked about at the start of the thread. They have literally an intake queue, okay, where all the disinformation goes in. They get to scan everything and say whether you're allowed to think that or talk about that or believe that or retweet that or email that or whatever. It has a tier 1 intake team of a bunch of bureaucratic morons who then will get to decide whether you're allowed to talk about those things, on-call data gathering, and so on. They go to an analyst queue, so your messages, your speech gets lined up into some idiot's queue somewhere, and they say, oh gosh, he was making an election joke about voting on Wednesdays, or that was Trump who said something about, I won't be attending an inauguration, which means he's going to nuke Washington, D.C. or something. Right? Analyst queue. So then you get these very sophisticated people who are skilled analysts who do team maps, and they provide attribution, and then they push that over to the outcomes queue. And if one of the outcomes is you should be banned and censored and thrown off the internet and have all of your speech silenced in violation of the Constitution, well, that's just part of the problem. That's just part of the solution. Maybe you shouldn't be such an insurrectionist. All of those outcomes get pushed back over to all of the entities. So it's like this big filter that just censors out any problematic Trump information, because that would be problematic if that got posted online.
There are kind of 4 major stakeholders that we operated with, that we worked beside at EIP. Our partners in government, most particularly those in CISA, DHS, but also in all the local and state governments with whom we operated with the election integrity infrastructure, ISAC. We worked with civil society groups such as the NAACP, MITRE, Common Cause, and the Healthy Elections Project that worked at both.
Filter all of them out. Kanekoa says, who are these unelected bureaucrats? Chris Krebs. Remember Chris, this fellow? We spent a lot of time talking about him. He took a bunch of hearings in front of Congress, and he said that these were the most secure elections ever. Why? Because he installed his filter, his great filter that was able to censor information.
It exists just naturally within the ecosystem on Facebook and elsewhere. And that's where we need the platform to be more transparent in how their algorithms work, how engagement works, so that outside security experts and researchers can dig in and hold them accountable, that us as consumers of these platforms can hold them accountable and demand better.
What would we do if the Russians were doing this? The oath that we pledge coming into office as a federal official is that you uphold and defend the Constitution from threats foreign and domestic. We upheld our oath.
Sorry,
so is Donald Trump a domestic threat?
Yeah.
There is disinformation that he is spreading.
So then yes.
The Hunter Biden laptop. That was remarkably similar to a hack and leak operation from 2016. It was just in a different model. And again, whether it was Russia or not, I don't know, I don't care. The big shifts that I saw from 2016 to 2020.
You based your entire response policy on that, it being Russian.
Was the reaction across media and how they did not uncritically and breathlessly report these things.
Misinformation, the Surgeon General put his finger on misinformation in terms of blocking people getting to vaccines. You fought a lot of misinformation with respect to elections. Do you see similarities between those two?
Absolutely.
We need, for instance, also self-policing across groups like lawyers. So state bar associations can take action against those that sponsor the 60-plus frivolous lawsuits.
Oh, he wants the lawyers to lose their licenses if you go and you fight on behalf of your clients. If Donald Trump comes to you and says, hey, can you represent us on something? A lawyer would say, no, I might lose my law license. This guy wants your driver's license taken away if you transport misinformation, right? If you're somebody who says something, fights for your client, lose your law license. Maybe you should lose your access to the internet, honestly. I mean, if you're out there tweeting misinformation, why should you be even allowed online?
Percentage of those that were frivolous. You can look at COVID. You can see state medical boards similarly took action against a number of doctors that were grifting on various solutions to COVID. So
yeah, so everybody that he doesn't like should have their mouths shut closed. Alex Stamos is a former Facebook executive. He's the founder of the EIP network. Member of the Council of Foreign Relations, loves censoring his political opponents. He said over half of the Republicans in Congress are like ISIS. Yeah, that's the type of guy who wants to control information. And Kate Starbird is also somebody who works over at CISA. Grants have funded her work on domestic censorship for a long time as well. The Election Integrity Project uses advanced monitoring to map out entire networks of people who spread a narrative.
We would plot it in this way so we could see how it went viral. And what these do, this is a cumulative graph that shows the cumulative spread of a particular kind of claim. And what it has is on the y-axis is how many times it's been shared, and on the x-axis is time. And what we do is we plot each tweet on this as a shape, depending on what kind of, like what tweet type it is, if it's a retweet or a quote tweet or whatever. And we size each tweet by the size of the audience of that account. And what this allows us to do is not always, sometimes things take off with the random account somehow, but often you'll see these high follower accounts change the trajectory of a tweet, helping it go viral. So it allows us to see who is really influential in the spread of a claim. And so so his original post was repeatedly retweeted, remixed, and reframed as it spread through other influential social media.
So you can see they're just tracking it. Eliza Schaefer down there at the bottom, the Daily Mail got it, Tim Cass got it, Gateway Pundit got it, and then boom, and the whole thing popped up as real Donald Trump Jr. Dropped it, and it just spreads around like wildfire. And so they've got to shut everybody up. Starbird told her Facebook followers to vote Democrat, said that Trump's responsible for corruption and collusion. He's a racist as well, and he supports white supremacy. She also heads CISA's disinformation advisory panel. Guess who else is on there? Vijaya, recently fired top lawyer from Twitter. Okay, all of these people are on this entity, apparently, the Cybersecurity Advisory Committee. Look at this. Gotti's on there, along with Stamos and Starbird. Bunch of whack jobs. We have Graham Brookie, another person who's a government-funded disinformation expert, dedicated his time during Trump's years to promoting a false narrative that Trump was a Russian plant. All of these people who spread misinformation all the time are the people who are supposed to be securing us from misinformation. Now, as you can see, scrolling through this, I'd encourage you to go follow Kanekoa the Great to read the rest of this. He's walking us through literally executive after executive who work for these big tech entities. They were allowed to control the narrative. They were banning full lanes of communication in order to win. Okay, amazing thread that I will leave you to read. He says, regardless of your opinion, it's clear that they conspired to support their cause and to win. And so follow the rest of this over at Kanekoa the Great on Twitter. You can see it goes very, very in-depth. And of course, be sure to support him over on Twitter as well. Elon said that this was a very interesting thread, and so I'm fully expecting to see much more here. This is what Elon said in response to Kanekoa's thread. So it is interesting. I'd encourage you to go read the rest of it because there will be much more coming out. We'll expect Twitter Files 11 whenever it drops. Of course, we will cover it, and I hope you join us as we do. Thank you for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.